Hello again, everybody. This is Steve Callis, sports editor of the WestchesterCountyPost.com, speaking of sports. And I'm here with Anthony Sorbellini, also of WestchesterCountyPost.com. And we're here to do an analysis of the 10-part The Last Dance, which ostensibly is about the 97-98 Bulls championship season. But to me, it was more like a Michael Jordan 12 or 14-year video. Clearly, he was the star. I thought it was great. But I'm going to throw it over to Anthony Sorbellini, who at the age of 26 he lived through it, but didn't really, obviously was too young to see it for what it was, because I'd like to get his initial unvarnished impressions of it, being the first time that you really saw Michael Jordan as Michael Jordan throughout his career.
Yeah, I mean, kind of keeping it short and simple. There's not too many athletes, not even just whatever sport, just athletes in general, who I genuinely wish I actually got to see play. But watching this documentary, Michael Jordan's easily the top of the list, without a question. You heard the stories, but to actually see it and just he was kind of the first major sports icon. We're watching The Last Dance and everything, seeing all the clips of him walking to the arena, leaving the arena. There's a clip of him. I'm assuming he was coming back from baseball practice, and little kid hops out of the car in the middle of the road, and he's signing a baseball for him. It's just how larger than life he was and still is. He kind of put, I guess, major athlete superstardom, I guess, on the map. And then, of course, just the competitor he is. I mean, he's borderline psychotic, simply for the fact, just because, how many he dedicated his entire life to being the greatest. And one of the major things I took from it is that, it's not kind of just meant for athletes, so to speak. It's kind of giving you that, not edge, but, it's kind of pushing you in the direction. If you want to be great at something, you have to put the hours in, you have to dedicate yourself. You have to get fully enveloped in it. And that was my biggest takeaway, alongside just some of the great, the great interviews, the great behind the scenes footage, the great, never seen footage before. It's just, I said it last night, and I'll still say it's probably my favorite sports documentary. Will be probably for a very long time, if not until the day I die, because I was fully enveloped. Every Sunday I was like, all right, last dance night. So I loved every minute of it.
Well, it is incredible in that there was obviously a 20-year span before, I guess, Jordan had to agree to actually do it. And then you could get the guys 20 years, 22 years after the fact to discuss things. And also as they went back from not just the 97-98 season, all the way back to the 80s, or even college when he was at North Carolina. I found it fascinating as well. But you make a good point. You don't really see the massive crowds that he had to deal with behind the scenes. And there was the one scene in the hotel room where he had his feet up on the couch or something, where he's saying, this is really the only place I can be, because once I step outside, and whenever he stepped outside, it was a madhouse. But specifically about Jordan and his game, the thing that I was most impressed with, he came into the league, was a phenomenal player right away, but was really kind of a one-man wrecking crew. And he himself thought he had to be a one-man wrecking crew to win. And as great as he was, maybe it wasn't until the Pistons had beat him up 3 or 4 years in a row. And I mean literally beat him up. I don't mean,
There's no certain. I mean, one thing I will say, if NBA basketball was played like it was in the 90s or even the 80s, I would. And if it was played the same way today, I would be glued to every single game. Again, wow. I've said many times I'm not the biggest basketball fan, but I have never been fully. I'm watching these games I don't know the outcome, and I'm like, oh my God, this is happening.
Right. Well, in terms of physicality, as you point out, the Pistons of the 80s and, frankly, when Pat Riley got to the Knicks, when when he left the Showtime Lakers to go to the Knicks, he made it like a rugby scrum in the 90s, with Oakley and Ewing, Xavier McDaniel. It was similar. They just weren't as good as the Pistons. They couldn't get over the hump against the Bulls. But I thought it was interesting, the whole Jordan rules thing, where the Pistons did control him for 3 or 4 years. And I'll give my high school coach a pop, Brendan Malone, who was Chuck Daly's defensive assistant and was my coach at Powell Memorial 100 years ago. They asked him about the Jordan rules, and he went through them. They weren't very complicated. But the best thing and most interesting thing, where these guys admit what they did, and they asked him, part of it was we couldn't let him go baseline. And the guy who was filming him said, so what happens when Michael went baseline? And he had this little grin on his face, and he said, well, that's when, Lambeer, Rick Mahorn just knocked him to the ground. And that was the theory. That was probably the biggest rule of the Michael Jordan rules. And frankly, it worked. So I thought the biggest transition that I saw, if you ask me what the most amazing thing, which I didn't really quite understand, Phil Jackson came in to coach after Doug Collins, and the Pistons beat him the first year Phil Jackson was there. And then that winter, according to Jordan, is he really bulked up, which is, something athletes do, but he really focused on getting stronger. And they show you the physical beating he took every time he went to the basket. Oh, yeah. In addition, and probably more important, he decided to trust other players. That's partly Phil Jackson. That's partly Tex Winter and the triangle, which wasn't give Michael the ball and get out of the way. There was that playoff game he won with Doug Collins where he scored at the buzzer, and they asked Doug Collins in the post-game press conference, so what was the final play? And he looked at the guy, he started laughing, and he would go, give the ball to Michael and get the bleep out of the way. Yeah. That was the plan. And it got him far. It just didn't get him over the hump. So when he realized both he had to get stronger, which he did, and then after the first year with Jackson losing, he decided maybe more so he had to trust guys. And you saw the guys then Paxson in the second group of 3, Steve Kerr, and of course he virtually always, or at some point always, trusted Scottie Pippen. So I think that was the biggest transformation for me with Michael Jordan. But you're right, his athleticism, his ability to make big shots. And the other thing I'll just talk about is the way he got a chip on his shoulder over Clyde Drexler. Oh, they think Clyde Drexler is as good as me. Or Karl Malone, I think one year, they gave him the MVP. Or George Karl, the coach, walked by him one day in a restaurant and didn't say hello to him. And
didn't say hi to him during the finals. He's like, well, yep, you're on my list now.
They were both Carolina. So real or imagined, he took those things and made them incredible. I'm going to kill this guy. B.J. Armstrong when he moved to Charlotte. I mean, there were like 10 examples in this thing. So you're right, his competitiveness, but also the way he matured from one-man show to teammate. And again, the things he almost made up in his head to make him say, I'm going to beat you for whatever reason I can come up with. What are your thoughts on Michael Jordan, big picture, over his career?
I mean, after this documentary, I'm going to piss off a lot of LeBron people, but I don't know how you can compare, say, LeBron's even.
Oh, boy.
And this isn't even just a thing about, Jordan has his 6-0 in the finals, LeBron's 3-6. This isn't even about a matter of, how many rings they both have. It's just a matter of you're not seeing LeBron do this. You're not seeing anybody in today's NBA game do any of this. And we probably won't ever will see anybody ever do this again. The closest relatable person we had was Kobe. But
that's a good point.
And just the way, Jordan carried himself, went in, and just like you touched on it before, the only time he really had time to relax was, that whatever 2 or 3 hours he had, in a hotel room. And just the fact that he retired for a year and a half to go play, in my opinion, yes, I'm a baseball guy. I think baseball is one of the most hardest sports. But different video, different time. To go, you're the best player by a long shot in the professional sport that you play, to go play an even harder game. And, he was hitting a little over 200, which is remarkable. And then you come back and you still win another 3 championships.
Including, I think, losing to Orlando when he came back at the end of the year, and then I think sweeping them the next year. Yeah. As another payback.
Yeah, he said and his reason for that was I wasn't in basketball shape, and he wasn't because he was, you're lifting, you're training for baseball, which is, and he even alluded to it. It's two completely different workout styles, two completely different muscle groups that you need to have, and if he, it just this documentary, just a couple of just all the things that it dove into is crazy, not only the fact that him retiring, which he retired simply for the fact that just because he was just worn out from the media. I mean, I've been training my whole collegiate career to work in the media, and I'm watching this. I'm like, damn, I hate sports media, and I'm like, it's
Right.
crazy. And then like I said, he come back, win two more, and then which I thought was very very interesting. The documentary pretty much it ended with him saying, "Yeah, we could have won 7."
Fascinating ending. Yeah, I didn't know the whole story behind the ending. Found it interesting. I will say this before we move to Scottie Pippen. I will say about Jordan and baseball and Francona, who was the nobody knew him manager except he had played in the league when he managed Jordan. He said if he stuck with it that he could have played in the majors, but nobody ever said that he would be a star or a superstar. And from a baseball perspective, because I'm like you, hardest sport to be good at. We'll talk about that another time. But when he started out, he had like a third. First of all, they had to put him in Double A according because of the media thing, which I thought was terrible for him. They should have put him in rookie ball, A ball. Would have been a little fairer to him. But
I
you
mean, that also
understand.
speaks to him too. I mean, you throw him in
Right,
Double A, and he's all of a sudden comes out with what was it, 13 or 14 game hitting streak. Granted, he
right,
only saw fastballs, but still
right,
impressive. You're
right. But my
hitting low
point was,
ranges.
as a baseball guy, as you know, probably the hardest thing to do is hit, and the hardest thing within hitting is to hit a breaking ball or an off-speed pitch. Everybody in the major leagues can hit a fastball. They wouldn't be in the major leagues if they couldn't. But once they started doing that, uh, that was kind of the end of the year and a half, even though he played for a year and a half. And that doesn't mean he wouldn't have learned to hit it. I understand. I'll just say it again. Nobody goes from high school to Major League Baseball. And a lot of guys in the old days, when you could, superstars, LeBron, KG, Kobe, they went from high school. That would not happen. Guys don't even go from college right away to the major league. So it's a different thing for another time. But let's move on to Scottie Pippen. I'll just say a couple things about him, then I'll send it over to you. Um, Pippen was interesting. My son, who's your age, said he thought Pippen got a little bit of a short shrift because he had the migraine in Game 7. He wouldn't come off the bench that time when Jordan wasn't there and Tony Kukoc hit the shot. Also, even in the final game of 97-98, he had that back injury. On the one hand, I give him a lot of credit for trying. On the other hand, he was a shell of himself. He hit a couple of shots, but my son thought that was too they brought that up too much, whereas Pippen, in fact, is one of the 50 greatest players of all time, was a key cog. Jordan never won a title without him. And I kind of agree because Pippen, one guy said he's the greatest number 2 player on a team of all time. I personally, I'm old. I'd say take a look at Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, and everyone's forgotten about Elgin Baylor. I barely saw him play, but if you look at their stats, that could be an argument. But Pippen, as a defender, was incredible, as was Jordan, which is really part of their greatness. Nobody talks about their great defense, except that time in the finals they held someone to 54 points, like the lowest ever. Sloan was the coach of Utah, and after the game he looked at it. I think he was joking. It was 96-54, and he was like, "Is this really the final score?" I
I
think he
know.
was trying.
I saw that last night. I literally bursted out laughing because you're not going to see that. You're not seeing that today. What was his final
Correct.
score? 90-56, 90-54,
Right.
something like that. In an NBA Finals, it's not even like it was a regular season game. It was the finals.
And it still is the lowest in the shot clock era because of incredible defense. So I think for Pippen, he was a great two-way player. He had some of the greatest dunk. He had maybe the greatest dunk ever on Patrick Ewing because he threw him to the ground afterwards. Not that I'm a fan of that, but it's memorable. He was a great player. He had a great season. The year that Jordan wasn't there, he became the man, and he took that mantle. Of course, he hurt his reputation forever because that was the year against the Knicks. He wouldn't go in against the Knicks 1.8 seconds left because they didn't run the play for him. And I thought it was a big mistake. 20 years later, he's talking about it, and he goes, yeah, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then he looks at the camera and he goes, but if I had to do it all over again, I still wouldn't go in the game. So there's a few negatives about Pippen that were highlighted there that makes him look. They don't make Michael Jordan out to be the greatest ever from that perspective as a good guy, but clearly that was his competitive streak. I never asked you to do what I couldn't do, that kind of stuff. But Pippen, a great, great player. I think my son might have a little something there because he was so good. Could have easily gone to other teams and been the man and been a super duper star. And he kind of was a superstar, but he was always Robin, and Michael Jordan was Batman. What are your thoughts on Scottie Pippen?
Well, yeah, I mean, Jordan kind of alluded to it. I think it was the first episode. It's either the first or the second episode. I know it was very early, but he said there is no MJ without Scottie. So, Jordan gives all the credit to Scottie Pippen. He said, I'm not me without Scottie next to me. And their dynamic together, the way they played, the way, you said it, he was the Robin to Jordan's Batman. But I mean, yeah, I see where you're coming from, where they kind of paint Scottie as kind of like the villain in a sense when he didn't want to come play, when he didn't want to, get off the bench. But I mean, I see where Scottie's coming from. He's kind of living in the shadow of Jordan for, those 3 championship runs, and now that he's not here. And, even everybody said, in the interviews, like from the more recent interviews, they're saying, like, yeah, it's Scottie's team now. Like Scottie's running the practices. Scottie's Scottie's our guy. So I get where Scottie's coming at. Like if you're the new guy, why are you not getting the final shot? So I see where he comes from that, but yeah, I mean, in hindsight, he hit in the moment. I'm sure he kind of felt that was the right way, but then they had the locker room. One of the players literally started bawling out, crying and everything, saying like, you let us down, Scottie, and Scottie knew right then and there. And it also speaks to Scottie's character. Is this, yes, he did say that I'd still do it. It's easy to say that from now, but in the moment, like. I mean, we can allude to it. Yes, we didn't play professionally, but, you grind with those guys. They're your brothers. They're your second family in a sense. So for them to, see how tight-knit that locker room was, for them to kind of just call him out on it right then and there. And then, it was, wipe the floor with it. Next day, it was business as normal.
Right. I think the next person we should talk about is Phil Jackson, the Zen master, who always was a different kind of coach. And I will say this, because they didn't talk a lot about him playing for the Knicks, but he was on those 2 championship teams from the 70s. He wasn't a major player, but he was a player in 1970. And what he later said, what made him want to coach and what helped him tremendously, he was injured in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So he sat next to Red Holtzman. The funny thing is when you look at very old tapes, and they actually showed Game 7, 1970, Willis Reed walks out on MSG last week. And there were no assistant coaches. It's Red Holtzman by himself. But during that playoff run, Phil Jackson was around in street clothes. He did not play. But he said he learned an incredible amount. And then in 73, when they won, he did play. And he always thought that was the beginning. They got him from the Albany Patroons of the CBA, which was kind of a stretch. But he was a different kind of coach. And he used to do these, give them books to read. Steve Kerr talked about it. Even at the very end where they wrote down what they thought and they threw it in the fire. I mean, it was.
Yeah, Jordan, they were in the hotel after winning that 6th championship. And, there was a couple of reporters saying, they're like, hey, what about, can you do it again? And he was even saying, like, I'm taking a page out of Phil's book. I'm just going to live in the moment. That Zen Buddha. I'm just going to live right in the moment, which speaks to the coach that Phil is.
And the other thing I thought about Jackson that was impressive in the whole big picture of things is the way he handled Dennis Rodman. And the way he handled Dennis Rodman was kind of, do whatever you want, we'll figure it out, just come back and play ball. There was he went to the casino, and according to Jordan had, he's just leaving for 48 hours, and Jordan had to go and get him out of a hotel room with Carmen Electra, I think. But you did have to kind of let Rodman be Rodman. In fact, it was interesting, because when Rodman was on the Pistons, and he's the most interesting guy from I played on the Pistons when we just tried to kill Jordan. And then, of course, play with the Bulls. And Rodman gave him credit. He said, there's no other player I've ever seen who could withstand what Jordan did, how he took it against the Pistons and eventually turned the tables on them. But I thought Rodman was a fascinating character, and Jackson handled him the way, unlike most coaches at the time, I think they were, even in the 90s, kind of my way or the highway guys. And it is an interesting, that's what my son said to me too, there is no other coach that he knows of who really could have handled him, even if it was take his hands off. But what I wanted to say was, when Rodman was a Piston, and I'll plug my high school coach again, they interviewed Brendan Malone, and Malone said, I was coaching Rodman one day, and I was trying to show him some positions, and Malone was the defensive coach, the Jordan rules, and Chuck Daly called the coach over and said, just leave Dennis Rodman alone. You can't put a saddle on a stallion.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Chuck Daly's view, and Phil Jackson, I think, even broadened that out to not just on the court, pretty much let him do whatever the heck he wants to on the court, because Jackson and Jordan said this, I knew what Rodman could do for us basketball-wise, so we just kind of let him do what he wanted. Madonna was the one who told him to go like your own brand with the color of your hair, dress weird, nose earrings, when they weren't all the rage, I don't think, almost 30 years ago. But I don't think that they win, well, I'll go back to Jackson and briefly mention Tex Winter, because the triangle, whatever you think of it, it seems to have never worked except with Michael Jordan. There's that one great Steve Kerr, why were you guys so great? Well, A, B, C, D. Oh, and we had Michael Jordan. And you knew he meant, and we had Michael Jordan. But Tex Winter in the triangle, nobody else played it, hard to defend. And that's what also contributed to Jordan not being so selfish, because that's how the triangle was the way you would set up other guys. So I think Jackson was the perfect coach. And I think Tex Winter's triangle, well, not really. Other teams have tried it, but not really as successful. But, you could have played whatever you want with Michael Jordan and been really, really good. But with the triangle, he was essentially 6 for 6, except as you pointed out, when he came back really at the end of the year, he played like 15 or 20 games. And they got knocked out that one year, 95, when he came back from baseball. So give me your thoughts on Phil Jackson, Tex Winter, the coaching staff, whatever you think. I assume you agree, as most do, that he's the right guy for that team at that time.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, before Phil came in, I think Jordan kind of knew that, something was missing, just didn't understand. And it took that full year to fully, that first full year from the time that Phil became the head coach, and started to fully implement the triangle. Jordan even said, he's like, no, this is stupid. I want the ball. And it just kind of shows how Phil was able to, just connect with the players on not only just, from a coach-player standpoint, but as a person. I'm remembering this scene where it's just, it was Phil and Rod. Was it Phil and Rodman, or I forget who it was, but they were talking about Native American culture. About how Phil had all these little statues, and one of the players, I want to say it was Dennis Rodman, but I'm not entirely sure, how they just connected on such a different level as opposed to just player coach. It was more of like friend and friend, or kind of like father son aspect to that. So it touches on the type of coach that Phil is, and then again, Phil was kind of just that last ingredient that Jordan needed. And I don't think, pretty much everybody thinks, yes, Jordan's the greatest of all time, but I don't really think there's going to be 6 if you don't have Phil Jackson in there, because we saw it with before.
We've already talked about a little. I just want to say a few more things about Dennis Rodman, who I thought was the key. They really needed a defender in those second 3 championships, and they knew what he could do from the Pistons days. And, yeah, he did lose his mind a little, but it was mostly off the court, although he lost his mind sometimes on the court and got a lot of texts. But Rodman, to me, was not just a great defender. He was able to somehow judge the ball off somebody's hand when they shot. He was able to judge where the rebound was going. So many times he outjumped guys who were bigger than he was, only because he had that little 6-inch to a foot edge on exactly where the ball was coming. He really was, I know people might not believe this, but he really was a cerebral basketball player from a defensive rebounding and even offensive rebounding, but mostly as a defender point of view. What I found interesting, and I wish they would have talked to him about it, was I know he played. I actually forget the college he played. It was a small college, and he averaged 27 points a game. Yeah, he has the all-time record, as they showed. I think it's 7. He had the all-time record of no points with 20 or more rebounds in a game. But he was good to be on the team because I won't say you needed, well, maybe you needed 2 balls when Jordan was at the beginning. But later on, you had a lot of guys who wanted the ball, especially, of course, Jordan and Pippen. So to have a guy like Rodman, who not only didn't want it, but even when he got it, he was a decent passer. He wouldn't really shoot. I thought it was a key to have a guy like that who had no ego when it came to offense. And when you say that about the NBA, that's how many players in the league? 5, 10, and nobody was better than Rodman. So it is interesting to me how he spanned both of those teams, the Pistons of the late 80s, and then he was on the 3 on the back end. But he was a great, great player, great defender. He gets knocked for lack of offense. But given the team that he was on, frankly, the same with the Pistons. I don't think it was as big a difference, but, you had Isaiah, you had Joe Dumars, Vinnie Johnson, Lambeer. You had a lot of guys who could shoot the ball, so they were happy to have a guy on the court who they thought would pass the ball to him. But tell me if you have any other thoughts on Dennis Rodman through his whole career as well in this documentary.
The biggest thing that sticks out to me from watching this documentary about Dennis Rodman is how much of kind of a ball hog he was. Just the way he would go after all these rebounds. I remember this picture, and just he's fully laid out just trying to get this ball, and just you don't see that today. A couple of guys trying to jump out of bounds and everything and save it, but Dennis Rodman is literally jumping over people to save the ball, and he's doing it. And I'm so jealous of people who actually got to fully watch this team in the moment, because I'm watching all these from the documentary or just even from classic games that we've been airing for the NBA and everything. I'm fully involved in these, and I know what happens, but I'm still watching it like I've never seen them before. So this documentary has opened up a lot of eyes to everything. I think, if it's people who haven't watched it, even if you're not a big basketball fan, like myself included, I'm not a big basketball fan whatsoever, but go watch it. It's again, one of the greatest sports documentaries ever.
And I want to move now to the management, which was kind of controversial, I guess. Jerry Krause, the GM, Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner. Not really the owner. He did hire Jerry Krause, who was a baseball scout prior to becoming the GM of the Bulls. So that was kind of a almost weird thing at the time. And they mocked him in the whole documentary. I mean, what they said. But he was the little guy who wanted credit for a lot and deserves credit for a lot. Even at the end, Scottie Pippen says grudgingly, well, he says, we had the greatest player, Michael Jordan. We had the greatest coach, Phil Jackson. So we must have had, he said something like, so we must have had the best GM in Jerry Krause. And boy, did he take a beating all those years verbally. These guys, are those the pills you take to stay small or whatever? I mean, they really killed them. Having said that, just the fact that, to me anyway, just the fact that he drafted Scottie Pippen, I think in the second round, and he got Rodman. I don't know. They didn't really say how much it was in terms of hiring Phil Jackson that Jerry Krause was involved. I think Reinsdorf kind of took the credit for that. But just the fact that he made those, after Jordan, if you're going to ask who are the 2 biggest next players, Pippen's definitely next. And I think Rodman, because the earlier 3 years, they had some good players, but they didn't have a Rodman-like player.
Right.
And so I think Jerry Krause has to get a lot. Now, look, there was something wrong with him. He always wanted more credit and more credit. He had almost that little man complex that he never got enough credit. But he was the architect. They did win 6. I think he was a moron. I think it was Jerry Krause that said, if Phil goes 82-0 in the last year, he's still not going to be coach. And as Jordan said at the end, what was the point of that? And the point was, I'm the GM. I run the team. I'm going to show Phil who I am. And, the very ending of it was fascinating to me because Jordan said, would we have all come back on 1-year contracts? Yes. And I don't think Scottie Pippen, one thing we didn't talk about Pippen was he signed the worst contract ever in retrospect, 7 years, $18 million. but you would have had to have given Pippen, if Jordan was getting 30, 35 million, Pippen was a $25 million a year guy like the last
Right.
5 years of that contract. And he did talk about that. But, he also signed Pippen to the worst contract ever for Pippen, and maybe the greatest contract ever in the history of sports for a guy who just immediately after became a super duper star,
Mm-hmm.
and was always there, frankly, on the cheap. So I don't know that Pippen would have come back unless they gave him like 30 million. But I think they could have won the seventh. It's the old, we'll never know, but the way it ended at the end. But the one final thing I want to say, which I found fascinating, is at the very end of the documentary, and this relates to me, to Jerry Krause and Phil Jackson. At the very end, they showed all the banners up in the rafters.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right side, they had Jordan in the years he played, 6 NBA titles. Pippen in the years he played, 6 NBA titles. On the left, they had Jerry Krause, general manager, which I have never seen in the history of the world, a general manager get a banner. It said Jerry Krause. It said Jerry Krause, 6 NBA titles, and then next to it said Phil Jackson, and it only has his record. And
Mm-hmm.
to his record, 545 and 193. That's on the banner. But nowhere does it say Phil Jackson, 6 NBA titles. And I wish they had gone into that, because I'd like to know, and I am willing to bet, that it was probably Jerry Krause who put those banners up there in that way, because he was the only one really kind of left. Jordan left. Phil Jackson left. Pippen left, came back briefly like 4 or 5 years later, I think. He played briefly for the Bulls one more season. But I found it fascinating. And it was kind of an afterthought. Nobody talked about it. They were just showing you all the banners. I don't know if anybody picked up on it or not, but boy, I think that's a story in and of itself. But you got to give Jerry Krause credit. Of course, Reinsdorf was the manager and the owner of the White Sox. He owned them both, and he eventually won the World Series with them. And then Krause was going to do the great rebuild. The knock on him, organizations win championships. He claims he was misquoted, but the notion that he would have won championships without Jordan or without Pippen was
Just look
proven
at the
after
Bulls right now. That's all I'm going to say.
was proven after the draft. He was there. I think he was there another 5 years for the rebuild. That never happened, and then you're right, has not happened until this day. But still, he was the GM. He got his own banner, I think, up there in the rafters. But he does deserve credit for some great moves. And I guess he had to take a lot of mocking right to his face, which had to be hard to take. So give me your thoughts on management as a whole.
Well, I mean, as a whole, yes, I'll give credit where credit's due. Krause does deserve everything, but also at the same time, I've always kind of felt, listen, players play, front office people, you grab everybody. Yes, Krause put everybody together, but he's not out there on the court scoring 20, 30 points. Yes, you contributed in a way, but it's literally these guys going out there each and every night, literally putting literally putting everything out on the line. I mean, Dennis Rodman's jumping, halfway into the front row. Friggin' Michael Jordan's getting beaten, and there's a bloody eye and everything. Friggin' Scottie Pippen's out there limping up and down the court with a busted back.
Yeah.
And Jerry Krause is just sitting there. I mean, yes, he's the architect, so to speak, who put this team together. But and I will agree. I think he had kind of little man complex, kind of like chip on his shoulder, kind of I don't know his history. I don't know anything about him, but I don't know if he played sports, all this, yada, yada, yada. But, everything's competitive. And listen, no matter what you do in sports, if you're related into the sports world, no matter what, you're competitive. So I get where he comes from that, but organizations do not win championships. You can build an organization, yes, but no, especially in basketball. Basketball is the number one sport where players win a championship.
100% correct. The final people I want to talk about, I'll combine them together, but I thought they were the most interesting sidelight, especially since Steve Kerr has become, such a championship-winning coach. But Paxson and Kerr were kind of the same guy, that guy who hit a three. And eventually Jordan came to Paxson, made that one incredible three to win a game in the playoff game. in the first three championships. And then Kerr was very respectful of Paxson, and Kerr spoke. I think they played 1 year together on the Bulls, and Kerr said after watching Paxson play and being in the league, he was drafted by Phoenix or wherever. He said, I want to be the next John Paxson, and that's exactly what worked out. But Kerr was very happy about being taken by Paxson under his wing.
Right.
To really the next John Paxson. And I like what Paxson contributed. He knew what he was, as did Kerr. And, Kerr told the whole story about standing up to Michael and punching him. And then, Jordan punched him in the face. And Jackson threw him out of practice. But according to Jordan, he then had incredible respect for Kerr. And Kerr was even the one who said, I stood up to Michael Jordan. I wasn't afraid. He punched me in the face. But we had a different relationship from then. So I thought they were key components in their own way. Kerr hit a bunch of big shots, including that one to win a playoff game when Jordan got double teamed, and they did the great thing on the sidelines. And Kerr said, if you're double teamed, I'm ready. And that's exactly what happened. So give me your thoughts, if any, on Kerr and Paxson, and then we'll just wrap up the whole thing.
I mean, I had no idea who the hell Bill Paxton was before this documentary. And I was kind of always just under the impression that, Steve Kerr was kind of like, I guess I thought he was a starter normally. I didn't realize he was a role player. Again, not a big basketball guy growing up, still not a big basketball guy. Yeah. But I mean, Steve Kerr, again, I think it just speaks to the type of person that he is. He knew he was there for a reason. He had his role just like everybody else in all these teams and everything. So he knew it. He embraced it. He went about his business, and I like the piece, where they broke down, the incident between Michael and Steve at practice, and Steve was like, listen, like I'm a calm person, I'm competitive and everything, but he's kind of like, when you get me going, you're gonna get me going. So I kind of like that deep delve into Steve Kerr about everything, but
yeah,
it just speaks to everything.
My concluding thoughts are brief, and then I'll send it over to you. A fantastic documentary, as we both agree. Certainly makes the case even better for Michael Jordan as the greatest player of all time. My son is convinced. I'm not quite there, but that's for another time. In fact, I did a video, as you know, with my son on the top 10 NBA players of all time. But, a fantastic athlete. I think a better athlete than LeBron, although I've gotten into a couple of arguments about that already with some people. But fabulous documentary. It was interesting how they all couldn't come back. Reinsdorf said it would have cost me too much money, essentially. And Pippen was looking for a big payday, which, of course, he deserved after the contract that he signed. So I'll leave it as Michael Jordan, incredible player, great documentary. It was great to see it these years later. I know it was even better for you seeing it for the first time. And give them a lot of credit to go mentally the way they went, especially that last season. The Last Dance was just an incredible team accomplishment. What are your final thoughts?
I mean, my final thoughts, this is one of the greatest dynasties of all time, especially in the realm of basketball, probably the most. But I'm just in sheer sports world, I don't think, and just seeing it, for the first time where I could remember everything, it's just kind of, these were like the first like real like sports superstars, where you got lines, people waiting, all this security, media, everybody just swarming. I mean, it was either episode 9 or 10. It was either in some of in whatever episodes from last night where Dennis Rodman was trying to just run away from 300 media people after he just randomly went, just left, kind of did his load management to go with the WWE for a night, and then in the middle of the finals. So it's just, I enjoyed everything about it. I mean, one of the things I've always preached about sports is more than just a game. This brought everything out. You got to see who Jordan was as a person. You really got to see who Jordan was as a person. It broke down everything, from his gambling, which, by the way, not an addiction. He's not an addiction. It's an addiction if, he's a degenerate gambler, running out of money. But Michael Jordan ain't running out of money. Delving into his father's murder, delving into just him as a person, what he was like in practice, breaking down all this. just seeing how much of a competitive person he is, going into the career of Scottie, Steve Kerr, Dennis Rodman, all the other kind of role players, weapons around him. It's just, from a pure sports fan, just I loved everything about it. One thing I would love to know though is, could they have won 8 in a row? That's one thing I would just, because I would love to see that.
And I'm glad you brought up his father's death. I would be remiss if I didn't just talk about it briefly. And as you know, he was killed, stopped in a rest stop in North Carolina. But their relationship was so close. He was always there for everything. And part of the reason that Jordan went to play baseball was, he said, the last conversation he had with his father, because baseball was Michael Jordan's first love. Mm-hmm. And he said, I really would like to do it. And his father, which is one of the last conversations they had, apparently, if not the last, he said, well, you should just go do it, which, of course, he did. And then, of course, all the emotion when he came back and played for the first time without his father, that was a very emotional time. So, obviously, they had a great bond, as with his mother. It was certainly a wonderful family. But, yeah, I think I agree with you. One of the greatest sports documentaries ever, and they'll be watching it for decades to come. This has been Steve Callis, speaking of sports, with Anthony Sorbellini of WestchesterCountyPost.com. We'll see you the next time.